Hello and welcome to this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and joining us in studio today, it's his turn in the rotation, as we like to say. State Representative Chris Hendricks is with us.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
Thanks
always
for
a pleasure.
coming in. Busy time right now up in Beacon Hill, as it always is. Obviously, the budget process is going on, and when you really think about it, this is crunch time for you guys. You've got legislation coming down and bills to pass, budgets to pass. So this is your schedule's full to the brim right now.
Indeed, there's a lot going on. As you said, the budget season is coming up, so we're preparing for that, especially with my new district and how that's going to affect. I have to certainly change my priorities there a little bit. And with the State House opening up, to the public now, which I think is awesome. Hopefully things can kind of stabilize and get back to normal to a degree. So,
how has that gone? I know that there was, you and I have talked about it before. You wanted to get it open as soon as possible, but safely, obviously. Mm-hmm. And now it's open. I don't want to say things back to normal, but are people up there?
We are. Yes. Last week's formal was the first legislative session that we've had open to the public. It was. I remember people saying, it was a little. The turnout wasn't as great. We thought, there would be more people to come and sit in. But I think that's going to slowly come back. So everyone, when I was there, I think everyone who, there was some people still remotely, but I don't think because of any vaccination issues, just because, that for whatever reason. But it's certainly nice to have everything back, open. I think everyone's vaccinated. So even I think the two of the holdouts on the other Republican caucus, I even think they may have been vaccinated. So it looks like we're in good shape.
You were saying it was important to get back just because of the relationships and as far as the business of government, trying to get that done sort of on a timely basis, but now you can meet with your colleagues and staffs can talk to each other.
The ability to communicate and touch base with your colleagues, that's phone is buzzing here. Being able to talk with your colleagues and work out issues. And it's a lot of new people in the building as well, who've been elected within the last 2 years. So it's good to meet those folks, and those are the people you're going to be working with and on specific issues. So you want to be able to build those relationships. So that's the best reason why we're open now is that's the reason, especially for those newer folks.
And I would imagine too that the Zoom meetings and the some of the things that you took from the pandemic are going to still be around.
I would imagine so, especially as it relates to getting the public more involved. Because, if you wanted to go testify at a legislative hearing, something that's personal to you, you have to clear your schedule for that day. If you live in this area, it's going to take you at least 2 hours to get in. Right. So it's a lot of logistical issues with that. So I think at least having the remote option for the public to come and sit in on hearings, I think that would be awesome. Something that can stay moving forward.
One of the big things obviously coming up is that we've talked about in the past, the offshore wind issue. And I was talking to you off camera because I saw the article that, other states are certainly being aggressive in their pursuit of offshore wind and the development of that in their communities and what have you. And I read one of the, I think it was in Commonwealth, that not that Massachusetts was falling behind, but other companies, other states, I should say, were really being aggressive. Mm-hmm. I know, as you was telling me, the House has already passed legislation, goes on to the Senate. So tell us a little bit about the bill, why it was so important, and how it impacts here in New Bedford and just the state in general.
So last week, as you said, Jim, we voted on a big comprehensive offshore wind bill in the House. The whole reason the Speaker made that a priority because of the exact reason that you just highlighted. When they made the original procurement law, offshore wind bill, back in 15 or 16, whatever it was, they had a price cap, meaning that if you want to be a developer of offshore wind in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you have to be able to assure us that you're going to provide electricity at a certain rate. Okay, whether it be 7 cents a megawatt, however they calculate it.
And you have to have a certain amount of people, if I'm not mistaken, too, right? Don't you have
people for
customers?
Yes.
Right.
Right. Yes. So there's a lot of things that the developers have to assure.
Right.
The price cap was the most significant thing. It was determinative, in fact, with the old law. So if a company came in just slightly over the price cap, but they were going to develop the industry here in the South Coast, in New Bedford, with a focus on workforce development, those types of things, then we would have to say no to those folks. This new law allows the state to consider developers without regards to necessarily to the price cap. We can still be considered, certainly. But I think this is a way that can create more, because we only had 2 bids when we put out the first bid.
And my understanding was the last bidding process, some of the officials were surprised that there wasn't more bids. But I guess you were saying the cap was the issue.
The cap was the determining factor there. So now we have a law that we passed in the House. It goes on to the Senate that takes away that price cap. So if a developer comes in for the future procurements, we're not going to say you're out because of the price cap. Say, okay, if you're going to focus on economic and workforce development, but your price cap, your projections for your price isn't where we want it at this point, that's okay, because we need to build an industry here. Another thing that, perhaps the most important thing that bill did last week, was it creates a plan for getting the grid up to snuff with respect to offshore wind, because that's going to be a lot of megawatts coming off of the ocean.
Right.
So how do you get that electricity into people's homes? If all the procurements were constructed today, everything that we have out to bid was constructed and done today, we wouldn't be able to put it in people's homes because we don't have the grid on land to withstand it. So what this bill does is that puts the burden on utility companies, and it makes them come up with a plan and a strategy, along with mitigation efforts, to build that grid system here on land.
We've talked obviously in the past, obviously the issue's been the developers and what have you, but I don't know if there's been a lot of talk that I've seen so far, like you just said, about the grid and the utility companies that obviously are here. That's going to take a lot of work.
A lot of work, a lot of construction, a lot of manpower, a lot of planning.
Are they committed?
They are committed. In fact, we sat down, the delegation, this is months ago, we sat down with Mayflower Wind to get what their plan is, to talk to them about what they want to do. The thing that he made most clear, I forget the gentleman's name, he's from Scotland, nice guy, he's in charge there at Mayflower Wind, and he said the grid is our biggest concern. Being able to harness this electricity in a modern day fashion and get it to people's homes, that's going to be a problem. So I'm glad that they listened to those concerns. Jeff Roy, who's the chairman of Utilities, Telecommunications, and Energy, so he was in control of crafting this bill with the speaker and us. Whenever he would come down to New Bedford, he always had me, Tony, and the rest of the delegation involved along the way. So when I spoke on the House floor last week, with respect to this bill, I wanted to make sure that Jeff Roy, was noted as being very, amenable to listening to us and hearing our concerns, and that's one of the things that we were able to get in the bill because of that.
So what do the utility companies need? What do they? I assume they're looking at the state for help too to try to develop the grid. What are they looking for?
So the burden is on them to come
Okay.
up with a plan. They're in a good position to tell us what they need, and to do basically a study of the grid as it stands now, how it needs to be upgraded, how it needs to be become a smart grid essentially. And so the bill mandates that they come. I forgot where they have to send the study, but they have to. The burden is on them to come up with a plan. And as far as funding, this bill does put a surcharge on natural gas usage. I think it's expected to cost $12 a year for those users. So that's expected to put about $23 million or so into an offshore fund that will help fund grid infrastructure, port infrastructure relative to the industry.
Do you expect then utility companies, and I'm just using New Bedford as an example, do you expect utility companies to have significant infrastructure improvements here in the city?
I would think so. I think it's going to be statewide, citywide. And it's not only offshore wind, it's a whole renewables energy sector that, and the utilities companies know that they have to upgrade with or without offshore wind. Like I said, solar, all sorts of other renewables, they have to upgrade their grid to withstand all that. And this kind of lights the fire, if you will, to make sure that happens sooner rather than later.
Because I was going to ask about solar. I mean, there's a number of buildings that you see with solar panels, and I know it's a smaller scale, but there are some solar farms around,
right.
And I would assume that at that time the utility companies had to make improvements for them, although it's probably not going to be as big as the offshore wind. But
the grid has certainly been updated, along the way as new technologies come out. But certainly, I think that ties getting that grid stabilized and getting a strong platform for the grid is touches upon one of the aspects that you talked about, is the competition. So if you have a developer that's coming in 5-6 years from now, and we have a smart grid that's already locked and loaded and created, and New York might not be there yet, Virginia might not be there yet, that would be better for the state.
And the utilities are going to make money, right? I mean, you're looking at the developers. There's monies to be made from the utility side.
Yes. Yep. This is all them. And it's and like I said, they're aware that they have to update the grid as well. And so I think this helps them. It does provide money, as I said, with that extra surcharge. But it's but it's something that's going to hopefully grow over time, and being able to put the grid out front, whether it is offshore wind or otherwise, I think is just good policy for the state.
And with offshore wind, I mean, the state, all different forms of government seem to be obviously united as one, as we got to get offshore wind going.
Right. And I think one of the main reasons why this bill came down the pike, and why the speaker has prioritized the South Coast, prioritized offshore wind as the hub of it all, is because of Biden. And what he said he wants to do. I forget the kilowattage that he wants to reach after a certain level, but certainly the action we took here today will help achieve his the federal goals as far as getting renewables up and running.
And other communities here in Massachusetts are certainly getting involved with offshore wind that didn't seem to be involved 3-4 years ago. I mean, you mentioned Salem and Gloucester.
Yep.
So there's more competition, just even within.
Salem, it looks like it's going to have a port. Braden Point will be a manufacturing facility for the coils, the actual coils that goes underground, under the ocean, onto the mainland. So as this industry grows, you're going to be seeing more of that. And obviously, New Bedford is well situated. When you hear things going up in Salem, things going up in Somerset after all the work that we've done here for offshore wind, it's not the greatest to hear that. But we're trying to create an industry here, and this enough to go around for the state. And I think, fortunately, here in New Bedford, we have a port at the Mass Port that is just ready. It's shovel ready. It's one of the most, which I didn't know up until recently. It's one of the most innovative ports in the country. The way it's been constructed and the actual amount of weight it can handle, it's astronomical.
Really?
That port. So it's kind of a modern marvel right in our front yard that we don't even know about. So that is something we should be really excited about, is development, in the southern port in New Bedford.
So where, in a sense, do you see right now? I mean, we do have a couple of projects that are in the works here in New Bedford, Mayflower Vineyard. Will we see anything tangible soon, or is it still
I would think
down the
within the next year,
really
18 months, you start seeing some activity as far as actual turbines and actual work being done, whether it be the grid or the turbines or the coils, whatever,
right,
wherever they start for something like that. But it's going. All the permitting is all the procurements. The latest round was given to Mayflower Wind. So there's a lot. I think it's going to kind of start to snowball and grow at this point. So that's the idea, with this bill. And another thing relative to this bill that I want to mention is that it puts focus on vocational training, big-time workforce.
I was going to say, I mean, the legislature, has obviously joined with UMass Dartmouth and BCC to develop programs specifically for offshore wind. I mean, there's that commitment there, education-wise, to get the workers.
Yep, that's just another way to get ahead of the competition, in this new industry. So if you have an area that has, a vocational school, a community college that's focusing on all the stuff you just mentioned, offshore wind, working on turbines, the trade level stuff, safety especially. A lot of this training is safety because it's just on the ocean. This bill that we passed last week in the House devotes a lot of resources into making sure that DESE, Department of Education, Secondary Education, Development, they can create a credential system where they give money to districts that have kids graduating from offshore wind programs. So I think kind of incentivizing, and that is already up and running. What President Laura Douglas has done at BCC as far as getting workforce minded programs in at BCC for this industry, she's been on the ball in that. So I think that type of activity that's already been going on will make it, will provide benefits to us into the future, well into the future.
We've talked a lot about offshore wind, but obviously there's other economic development taking place in the city and in your district that is hugely important to the city as well. Obviously a lot of focus on downtown, which is good, but the North End is going to get some love, if you will.
Yes. So the North End recently received the TDI designation, which is a development initiative, economic development initiative through the governor's office. If you recall, there's been a lot of energy, a lot of focus on downtown over the last handful of years. That's because downtown for the last 10, 12 years has been designated as a TDI district, meaning that they get resources, they get economic support, all sorts of programming, grant program especially is the main thing, money. And so that, every couple of years they put focus on different areas. Now they designated the North End, the Cushit Avenue area as one of those districts. So over the next couple of years, you're going to see mass development a lot more involved in that area.
Well, it's interesting. If I'm not mistaken, when I read the article on that, it's rare for a community to have two districts named like that. And New Bedford is one of the rare ones that got the two.
Yes.
That's huge.
Yep. It's the gateway cities were a lot, heavily focused in this program to start, and I think now even more so. Which is why in the district, lines, may have affected that because now it's, we're in a totally different state house representative district. So I just think that we've put over the last few years, we put a lot of focus on the North End with money, infrastructure, like roads.
I was going to say the city did a lot of stuff, yeah.
And that's great, but at the same time, I think getting a little extra push economically, not just on the infrastructure and aesthetics. I think that will be a huge difference, especially with that community. It's a lot of small businesses opening, a lot of restaurants, a lot of like community active stuff in that area. So I think it's going to be an exciting few years coming up for the North End.
Will they be, I would assume, like for when you were talking about the grants, I assume that there'll be, obviously people have to submit and make proposals and what have you for the state to award the grant to a particular.
Yes.
Will it be, could restaurants or anybody?
I believe it's open to any small business. Yeah. I could get back to you on that, but in each district has a representative. So I think I have a meeting tomorrow, my first meeting with the TDI representative from Mass Development, talk about the plan and maybe the layout. I've already had multiple meetings with Corinne Williams since who's done amazing work at the CEDC. And so, having her involved, already and very active, I think, there's a lot of potential that, the North End might be more of a vibrant place 2-3 years down the road.
And the city, with economic development, the city's certainly been very aggressive with, another thing that you've been dealing with is the golf course, obviously, and the industrial park issue.
Yes.
Up there, and I know that's still going through the process right now, but it seems to be going forward. That's for sure.
Yeah, it looks like that's going to be, it's going to be down to a 9-hole course, and then there's going to be some space allocated, for the rest for a business park.
Right.
So I think being able to keep some of the course, because that's the course. It's one of the hardest courses I've ever played, if you ever played that. So I won't be sad to see some of those holes go. But I think having another wrinkle, you can add business, add more economic development on top of what's already in the works. I think it's going to be
well,
a game changer.
It just seems, from my perspective on the outside, it seems there's been certainly the city, the legislative delegation, obviously the municipal leaders, the mayor. Without saying, they've done a lot of work to try to generate jobs and businesses to come to the city.
Yeah.
In the recent past.
Right. Yeah, we've been very fortunate with.
And the state's been responding.
Right. Yeah, we've been very fortunate with guys like Mayor like John Mitchell. I think he's done a great job, advocate for economic development here in the city. Guys like Mark Montigny, things like that. They're instrumental in getting, that type of economic buzz happening. So I'm fortunate that those guys are around, to get things like that happening.
Another thing we wanted to chat about, and I was talking to you again off camera about this before as we were trying to lay what we wanted to talk about, but housing seems to be a huge issue, and I brought it up in a sense where I saw that there was an article that shelters across the state are asking the state legislature, as they do their budget process, they want to increase monies for shelters. I was thinking of the Sister Rose House here in New Bedford, but that relates to housing in general. Is that housing prices are just...
Yeah, housing prices, as many watching, are astronomical, and rent prices are just getting worse and worse. So there has been a focus over the last couple of years, especially since COVID, even before COVID, with the Baker administration kind of focusing on housing and getting the ability for towns and cities to create affordable and build affordable housing. They focused a lot on the zoning issues. So if you recall that we made a for zoning issues, changes in local areas and municipalities, it went from a supermajority to a simple majority. That's something we did last session. I think there needs to be a little more done on the housing front because of that. If you recall, Cruz Construction wanted to build an affordable housing complex in the North End here a couple of years ago, and the neighborhood shot it down. Right. So housing issues can be very difficult. Even though that area needed affordable housing, they needed the space. They shot it down.
And the thing is, affordable housing. What you almost ask, what is that? Because as you were talking off camera, you're seeing rents here go through the roof, and I didn't even realize, as you were saying in Boston, you've got rents that were $1,500 a month that are doubling.
Yep.
It's not just here; it's everywhere. And when you say affordable housing, you were talking rent control.
Right.
Rent control. What are those issues now?
Housing is one of those issues where it can be politicized beyond belief, and it can just deter people from even debating it. So there are some bills up at the State House that are referred to as rent stabilization, which are basically tenant protections. It's also landlord protections. The main piece of the tenant protections, was something I would be for, is allow cities and municipalities to prevent landlords from raising the rents beyond a certain percentage. So I think the bill, some of the bills that we've considered in the Housing Committee suggest that preventing landlords from beyond 5% each term. I think that's reasonable. If your landlord calls you up, say, "Yeah, we're going to raise your rent by $1,000 each month," I think that's something that, as policymakers, we should be able to prevent, especially with astronomical with people needing housing. In COVID, it's exacerbated all those issues. So I think there are some tenant protections in there that we could put in place.
I would imagine you're getting blowback from that from people who are saying, "Well, I'm buying a property and I'm fixing it up, and I should be able to charge what I want to charge."
Right, and there's a balance, just like everything else, and certainly. But I think having the availability of that of towns and cities to do that, I think, is the way to go, because all these things are local options. So if we pass these bills tomorrow, House, Senate, Governor. It doesn't mean that we have rent control. It just means that a city, if they want to, can put those tenant protections in place.
But the other thing is there's just not a lot of housing around either. So
the
basically supply
stock
demand
itself is is a problem. And I know after COVID hit, we put a lot of more money into the RAF program, programs like that. But at the end of the day, the program, the issue you just mentioned, that's not going to help building. The governor thought that zoning fix would help some of that. As of yet, it hasn't turned out that that's generated a lot more construction, but we'll see. But I think there's some tenant protections we can put in there, just the tangible things that people are experiencing now, like rents being priced out. You don't want the train coming down here to New Bedford, which is great to have access to Boston in such a way, and then have everyone priced out. So rents are going to go up
we were
because of the train. We just want to make sure it's not, it's at a reasonable pace.
We were explaining to our child, my wife and I, that there were rents that are for a 2-bedroom apartment in the North End was like $1,800.
Yeah,
and it's our mortgage that we've had for years is cheaper with a house with 5 bedrooms is cheaper than a 2-bedroom apartment. It seems a little off kilter when you really think about it that way.
Yeah, that's exactly the problem. And so the market, it can be volatile. So sometimes the statutory pieces lag behind. Another tenant protection piece that I want to talk about is a lot of people get priced out because of first and last and security deposit.
Right.
The local option that would be available if something like that passed would allow the tenant to spread that charge over 6 months. Okay, so instead of
your first month, you'd have to for your first month's rent or the last month, you'd have 6 months to pay that off.
Right. Whatever the upfront cost is, whatever a landlord would charge, your municipality could vote to make sure tenants have the option to pay that over a 6-month period, as opposed because that's a lot of people have the ability to pay rent over time, but not those upfront costs.
Right.
So I think little tangible things that you could do to help folks out along the way certainly are available to us, and hopefully, being on the housing committee, I've heard all the arguments for and against. It can be very politically hot, that topic. So hopefully we can get something done in that regard.
We got about a minute left, and I just want to briefly ask you, obviously with the situation going on in Russia, the war against Ukraine, I know the state are trying to take steps to show solidarity to Ukrainians. Really limited. I know that the state was looking at divesting the pensions, anything in the pension system that is related to Russia. I mean, there's not much really at the state level you can do.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's a lot of it is symbolic. Last week I signed a letter written by the Republican caucus that urges the governor to, like you said, divest from anything that's Russian related. I think that's a good start. The question is, will our action have a tangible effect over there? I mean, that's the idea, right? Probably from what I'm told, it won't have a whole hell of a lot of impacts, a detriment to Russia, which is what you want. So I would certainly be for divesting anything. I think what Vladimir Putin is doing is obviously disgusting, and we need to, however we can convey our displeasure with that, we should. You see this guy Zelensky. I mean, if this guy dies, I mean, whether he survives or not, I think he's a hero for what he's been.
Right.
It's amazing what the Ukrainians in their army are doing. It's just, it's awe-inspiring. But
it's amazing how much something so far away affects us here,
right
in our backyard. So.
Yeah, and also with the sanctions stuff, you got to be careful of that too, because once you go too far, if they consider that an act of war, what happens then? So it's a precarious situation all around, I think, and I think we should just pray that the United States and NATO handle this smartly.
Right. It's good seeing you. Had a lot to cover today, but it was good. I think the offshore wind is something we gotta just obviously keep
and I'm sure
pedal to the metal on that.
We'll be talking about more and more as we move forward.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for this edition of the Beacon Hill Reports. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.